So today I have with us Forrest Leary from Risk Transfer Partners, and what we're going to be discussing is we're going to be talking about more specifically general liability for contractors, a lot of things that go inside of general liability contracts. And so Forrest, thanks for being here. I know you're from Dallas. We're here in Baton Rouge today for the North Lake meetings. So how about you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I practiced law for a little while before getting into insurance. I did employment litigation and saw some contractor lawsuits there. But now I exclusively do construction and contractors insurance.
Excellent. So we'll kind of jump right into it. So kind of what we're going to be covering today is discussing general liability insurance for contractors. So we're going to be sticking strictly to the construction industry. Talk a little bit about kind of what general liability is, some of the pitfalls, the exclusions, some endorsements. These are those things that, for a lot of you, probably don't really care much about, but these are things that when you get sued, when something happens, these are things that are going to matter. So let's kind of talk about the first thing with general liability. I mean, let's talk just in generic terms. What is general liability? What does it do? What does it cover?
Yeah, so we'll try to keep it real world to make it
Yeah.
easier for people to understand, right? So the first thing for a general liability policy is it's a third party policy. It's not a first party policy, right? Your homeowner's insurance, your property insurance, that covers your property. General liability covers liability to other people. So if you burn someone else's house down or if you injure somebody else, it covers any kind of lawsuit that's going to come up or claim that comes up related to the damage to the other person's property or the other person's bodily injury.
Perfect. So, I know one of the questions that we get a lot is, as we're talking about general liability insurance, especially for the general contractor, we just, well, what's your subcontractor cost? Well, why do I have to pay for subcontractors coverage if my subcontractors have insurance? So, can you touch a little bit about for general liability for a general contractor, why we have to take into account the subcontractors and making sure that we're rating for the amount of work that they're doing for you?
Yeah, well, that's kind of opening a can of worms there because we're going to touch on that. Kind of touches on several different exclusions and coverages that are important to contractors. So the first thing is that there's a nice little give back if you're a general contractor. So like we said, the property damage is only for third party property. It excludes your work, right? So if I'm a roofer and I put on a bad roof and there's water damage to the whole house, it doesn't pay to fix the roof. It only pays for the rest of the house. However, if I'm a general contractor, that whole home is my house. So what's it really covering? Well, there's a give back in most policies. You want to make sure this isn't excluded, but there's a give back for work done by subs. So if you are a home builder and you build a home and the foundation's done wrong, the foundation guy doesn't have coverage to fix that. But if you are covering that subcontractor, if you don't have a subcontractor exclusion for that, your policy will actually pay for that foundation coverage. So that's why it's important to have that coverage. The other thing too is if you get sued because of your roofer's employee falls off the roof and that person sues you, well, you don't want to have a bodily injury to a subcontractor exclusion on there. You can try to hand that off through indemnification, but we'll talk about some other exclusions, here as we get into it, where that might not be picked up on your sub. If you don't have proper indemnification, that if there's a bodily injury on your job site, if you're a general contractor, that you're going to have coverage for that.
And let's remember too, especially when we talk about residential and the new home warranty act in Louisiana specifically, the whole house is your project. So if something happens, you as a general contractor, you're getting sued.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to defend yourself. Now, as we start getting into some of the indemnification things and your subcontractors, defending you and paying on your behalf, but what if that AI endorsement, as we'll talk about, isn't going to cover you later? You still have the defense costs. You might be on the hook for some of that liability. So those are some things that, we're definitely going to touch on. And so let's jump straight into kind of indemnification. When we're talking about general liability insurance, one of the questions that we get from whether it's our general contractors, even our subcontractors, is how do I protect myself? especially when you think about whether they're commercial or residential, a general contractor, most of the work, if not all of it, is done by subcontractors. So how can I protect, if I'm a general contractor, how do I protect myself through indemnification and through, language to protect myself
Yeah.
from something happening?
Well, look, so they should always have a hold harmless agreement, right? I don't want to get into the nuances of that. If someone needs a hold harmless agreement, they can come to you. You can kind of give them a copy of one. I know you've got a good one on
And
file.
seek legal counsel. We are not tax or legal advisors.
That's right. But also you want to make sure that you're getting your additional insured for ongoing and completed operations, your primary non-contributory, and your waiver of subrogation. And you need all three of those forms on your policy to actually indemnify someone else or to get indemnified, right? So the way that those work is the additional insured form gives you, so let's just say if your subcontractor has additional insured form, right, for ongoing operations and completed operations. Those are two different forms, right? That makes you an insured underneath their policy, right? So if there's a claim and their policy will respond, that means that it'll respond to protect you. So that's what you need. But you need two other forms as well. You need the primary non-contributory. What that is in lawsuits today, rarely do they ever say someone's 100% at fault. Usually it's you're 70% at fault, I'm 30% at fault, right? If you don't have that primary non-contributory, then their insurance might only pay the 70% for you, but that 30% indemnification, you might have to pay that yourself, right? So you're not really getting indemnified for 100% of the costs. The other thing is waiver of subrogation. Let's say you have the first two forms on there, but you don't have the subrogation form on there, right? Subrogation is when your insurance, let's say you're the subcontractor, you're indemnifying me, there's a claim, you're 70% at fault, I'm 30% at fault. I get your insurance, I'm an additional insured, you've got primary non-contributory, so you pay 100% of those damages, right? But then your insurance company could sue my insurance company and try to get that 30% back. Well, I don't want your insurance to sue my insurance company.
Right.
So that's why you had that waiver of subrogation, to make sure you can't sue me after the fact, right? Your insurance can't sue me after the fact. So that's why you need all three of those, right?
Yeah, and let's dive in a little bit too, because this is something that I don't think a lot of people completely understand. Is so speaking of the additional insureds, you have there are more than just the two basics, but the two basics. So the CG 2010 or its equivalent of the additional insured for current operations, and then the CG 2037, which is the additional insured for completed products and operations. So can you touch a little bit on the difference between the two, and especially in construction, how that could really affect a claim that might be 6 months down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 2010, right? That's your ongoing operations, right? So that's going to be like a bodily injury, right? Someone falls off a roof, breaks their arm, or someone drops something off a roof and injures somebody else, right? You're kind of going to know when that happens right away, right? Or there's some kind of construction of products damage, right? Let's just say scaffolding falls over into a building next door and damages it. Whatever that is, that's going to be known right away. That's going to be your 2010. But then after you build that home or you complete that project or whatever it is, commercial, residential, doesn't matter. When you complete it and you walk away, you've got a 10-year statute of repose, which means that for the next 10 years, if something comes up and they deem that you built it incorrectly, you could get sued for that. So if you're a general contractor, you want to make sure, if you're a subcontractor who's indemnifying somebody, you want to make sure that you have the 2037. That is your completed operations form. And that's going to give you coverage for the next 10 years if something comes up.
And that's important because, one would think, well, the subcontractor has insurance, they have completed products operations, as part of their aggregate and so forth. But the important thing is, it's the additional insured status for the general contractor that if they don't have the 2037 for completed products and they finish their job, they move on to the next one, 2 or 3 years down the road, something happens, their insurance will still pay for it, but they're not going to cover, so they're not going to indemnify, they're not going to pay on behalf of, or do anything for the additional insured for the general contractor. So now the general contractor is left sort of out on their own. and their insurance company to handle it from there.
Well, yeah, and look, the real world reason why you want indemnification, right, is usually you're providing an indemnification to one of your clients, right? So do you want to work with that client again in the future, right? Because the reality, if they're expecting you to be indemnified by you and you don't have proper insurance, well, they don't care if you didn't do your job or I didn't do my job. All they care is that the contractor they hired didn't do their job. And so you're either A, going to have to indemnify them out of your own pocket, go hire your own attorney, pay the attorney's costs, and deal with that. Or you're probably just going to lose that client, right? And so, you know, you don't want to, we all want to do our best for our clients here. You know, that's, you know, we all, everyone in, you know, in the contractor world, you know, insurance is, you know, insurance contractor as well. We got to do a good job for our people.
Absolutely.
You know, if I give you a bad policy and you give your contractor a good policy and he loses his client, he's probably going to lose you. You're probably going to lose him, and I'm probably going to lose you. So yeah, it kind of comes full circle there.
Yeah. So all right. So now let's take it sort of a step further. Speaking of that general contractor to subcontractor relationship, in well, what should be every relationship between a general and a sub, there should be some kind of subcontract agreement. We talked about the indemnification and all of those, but a lot of times in there are those hold harmless agreements. You know, the indemnification. So now let's talk about, because I think this one's misunderstood by a lot of people. So like
Some
an
exclusions?
employer, the exclusions, like an employer liability exclusion.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about, because we're starting to see this situation a lot more where it's in the policies, it's, you know, employers, and so you think like, oh, well, we have workers' comp that has employer's liability. You know, if one of my guys gets hurt, that's primary. I mean, that's going to pay. We're done.
Yeah.
But that's not exactly real world if a subcontractor signs an agreement with the general to indemnify and hold harmless. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the like employer's liability exclusion and how that situation could work, and then could go totally sideways in that relationship?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is called an action over exclusion, right? Well, let's just give this scenario, right? You're a subcontractor, I'm a general contractor, you're a roofer, right? Your roofer falls off the roof and he collects workers' comp insurance from you, right? And then he sues me though, right? So it's kind of, I wouldn't say he's double dipping because, you know, that's everybody's right in this country is to sue when something's not done. But he can't sue you directly because you're his employer, right? And that's why there's a employer's liability exclusion in the GL policy, actually, right? So there is one in there. What you're talking about is, we'll get to that in a second, because the GL policy, it pays third-party damages, right? Your employees are considered part of your company. Your employees can't sue you. Your general liability policy doesn't provide coverage if your employees sue you. But your employee can sue me, the general contractor, and then I can ask for you to indemnify me, right? Which is expected to do. So you need to make sure that you can indemnify, you know, so in that case, you would be in a lawsuit where you are defending a lawsuit against your employee, right? Because you're just indemnifying me. Right? So you're picking up the lawsuit where I'm getting sued by you, and so that's kind of the third party damages there, how that picks up. An action over exclusion would say we're not covering that scenario, right? If you see another endorsement on a policy in an endorsement forms, not in your general liability policy form, but then you'll have endorsements on there. If you see an endorsement that says employer's liability endorsement, it's probably an action over exclusion, excluding this scenario that we're talking about right now, right? Now let's say you use 1099s and you don't use W-2 employees. Well then if you have a bodily injury to contractor, to subcontractor, where those 1099s would be considered uninsured subs, and so you wouldn't have coverage. If you have a bodily injury to subcontractors exclusion on your policy, then there's no coverage in an action over scenario where you're 1099 suing me and I'm asking you to indemnify me. Right? So that's why you want to make sure you don't have those, you know, exclusion for uninsured subs, which you see that a lot. You know, that's going to be a sub warranty. That's what that form's probably going to be on the lookout for. Kyle will look for all this stuff and knows what to look for. But you know, you just want to make sure that you don't have an action over exclusion. It can kind of manifest itself in several different ways, right? Now, let's also talk about, you know, there's a couple other things to talk about as well. But let's talk about contractual liability real quick too,
Okay, yep.
because there's also a contractual liability exclusion on the GL, right? We're talking about contracts and indemnification right now. Well, the contractual liability endorsement on the GL defines, it says it does not exclude an insured contract, which is where that's a tort liability. Someone sues you, right? If you're agreeing to indemnify someone, that is what an insured contract is. And so that's that kind of contract. You can have contractual liability for an insured contract, for an indemnification or a hold harmless agreement. So if you're looking through your forms and you see a contractual liability amendment, well, that might be another way where it's excluding indemnification agreements. So you got to be on the lookout for those as well.
And where I think too, because this is something that we're seeing. I mean, there's a lot of contractors who have these exclusions in their policies, but they are signing contracts with general contractors, specifically saying that they're going to do these things, and there's no coverage for it. And you want to talk about ruining a relationship quick? You know, a general contractor is hiring you to do work. Something happens, no problem, until it's not covered, and you said it would be because you signed a contract stating.
Well, so look, I think your first question was, if I'm a general contractor, why should I pay for insurance? Why should I pay for insured subs that have insurance, right? Well, these whole exclusions we're paying for right now, right? The contractor's job is not to be the expert on the policy, right? So you want to make sure that if your subs have a bad policy, and there's a lot of bad policies out there, right? I don't know, frankly, how it's legal for some of these people to sell some of these contracts, but or these policies. But anyway, so if you're a general contractor, you just want to make sure you don't want to rely on your subs, right?
Correct.
You want to make sure that in a worst case scenario, you're going to have insurance actually, that your policy is going to respond, right? And so I think the last thing that I know, one thing we want to pick up on here, and this can kind of manifest itself in a bunch of different ways on the policy. So this is, I'd say, not our contractor's job to be on the lookout for this, but yours and ours is a class code exclusion, right? And that's one that's kind of sneaky because once again, it's a client first world, right? And so you might be a roofer or an HVAC contractor or a framer, but if your client asks you to do something real quick that's outside of that box, and you do it, and there's a claim from it, then there's no coverage, right? A class code limitation says I'm only going to pay for claims that arise. If you're a plumber, if you're not plumbing, there's no coverage.
Yeah, and
right?
it specifically says in that limitation exclusion, there's only coverage for the class code listed on the declarations page and nothing else. I mean, that's specific language. And so when you look at that class code, if it's plumbing, then you have coverage for plumbing, but not if you go and do framing work or siding or anything other than plumbing.
I'm literally dealing with a claim right now where a general contractor who remodels apartments, and he uses all supervisors, but it's one of his good apartment, they're doing a renovation for it, and they had a busted handrail, and so he went out and just, did a quick welding job, quick soldering job to kind of fix that for him, and there's a fire, right? He's a general contractor. There's no welding class code. There's no hot work class code on his policy, right? But luckily, he doesn't have a class code limitation on there. And so even though he's doing something that they would never expect him to do, and that's where the claim pops up, there's still coverage. And you've seen enough claims. It's amazing how often the claims pop up on the stuff that is in the 1% of the operations, not the 99% of the operations. Because let's be honest, if you're a plumber, you probably know how to do your job,
right?
And now we can talk about we won't go to rabbit hole, but anyway, it's going to be when you start helping clients out. That's kind of when I personally tend to see a lot of claims happen. So that class code limitation is something that may seem like a small deal, but can turn into a pretty big one.
Yeah, and it's not. You would think it wouldn't be something that common that people would look, but I mean, we had one just recently that you and I are working on that. We had a situation, an HVAC contractor, but they also do plumbing, and not it may be a small percentage of their revenue, but
Mhm.
still could be six-figure jobs, clear as day. HVAC only, no plumbing.
Mhm.
I mean, that's, if you're talking about a six-figure job and you have no plumbing coverage,
Yep.
water travels fast.
Yeah.
Path of least resistance. I mean, it's going to cause damage, and so that's one of those that can cause some serious. And speaking of some of these exclusions, I mean, I guess one more we could cover that we see a lot is a subsidence exclusion.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about construction, especially in our South Louisiana, we're building on swampland. The grounds move. So can you touch a little bit on kind of that subsidence exclusion and why that could be a major problem for a contractor, especially if whether they're a concrete contractor doing foundations or maybe a drain, sewer, utility type contractor,
Yeah.
on what a subsidence exclusion could mean for them.
Well, I mean that's the most horrifying one to have on there, right? And also probably one of the simplest ones to understand, right? If the earth moves, if there's a claim because the earth moves, there is no coverage, right? Well, in Louisiana, if there's a claim for property damage, it's usually because the earth moved, right? And you said concrete, like that's kind of a common one. Hey, a framer, right? The ground shifts, right? And you're a framer where you're not doing any dirt work. But if there's a claim because you did framing and they can say, well, because the ground shifted and that does it, and you get drug into this, right? This is one of the things that you also have to think about is your defense costs, right? So
Yep.
if they can say, well, this claim is because the ground moved, we don't have to defend that, right?
Mhm.
We've got that excluded on here. That's the basis of this. Then even though you're in a lawsuit, maybe you're not going to ultimately be found liable. You might be in a situation where you got to go hire your own attorney to go.
Costs money to get you out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And you probably don't have pre-negotiated rates with attorneys like the insurance companies do.
Exactly.
And there's one thing, right? So roofers specifically, right? I see people try to sneak subsidence exclusions with your roofers, and your roofers are the guys. Well, A, the water runs off the roof, and then B, they're the guys doing the downspout stuff. And they're directing the water. They're putting the gutters on and doing the downspouts and directing water away. And if they don't do a good job of that I've seen more than once that being a foundation claim, which is a subsidence issue. So there's one more too I want to talk about here
Okay.
before we go. And we touched on this briefly, but this is the your work and exclusion on the GL, right? So we talked about how the GL is a third-party policy, pays for property damage to other people, right? Not your work, right? So it says that we are not a warranty for your work, right?
Right.
But there's a give back there. It says work done by subcontractors, right? So this is the scenario where if you're a general contractor and you're hiring subs to do all the work, it actually is a warranty for your work, right? Because it's paying for that. So if you're subcontracting out anything, even if you're using 1099s, this is a huge bonus for you because those 1099s are considered subcontractors, right? They're uninsured subcontractors, so you want to make sure there's not an exclusion for that, but they're subcontractors. So if you're using 1099s and you pour a foundation incorrectly, you can actually pay, your policy might actually, well, I don't want to say definitely, right? Every claim situation is different, right? But, by the, pages of it, that is not an excluded covering the cost of that foundation. If it's done by a subcontractor, a 1099 would be covered, right? So if you're a general contractor, you want to make sure that there's no subcontractor exclusion in there because that is probably the most important coverage piece in the entire policy for anybody that is using subcontractors is that subcontracted work give back.
I know that was a lot to unpack all of that, but these are the things that we're seeing every day, and so that's why when I talked to Forrest about doing this, we wanted to cover all these because these are happening. I mean, we're seeing claims with it. We're seeing the contractual issues with it. These types of claims are becoming more prevalent. And frankly, we talk about some of these claims. We're not talking about a $2,500 claim or a $5,000 claim. These could be $100,000 claims. You're talking about, if someone's building a $500,000 home, $1 million building, all of a sudden these are, substantial 6 and 7 figure claims. You can't worry about saving $500 on your policy to have these exclusions when you could have had the coverage and had it done, I won't say correctly, but
Well, look,
had the coverage.
the reality is if your insurance is too cheap, if it's too good to be true, it
Probably a
probably,
reason.
right, I would say save your money and buy yourself a bottle of champagne. You're going to get more out of it. At least you'll have a good time. But yeah, besides the fact that claims are becoming more prevalent, which is just kind of the litigious nature of our country right now.
Right.
For contractors specifically, building costs are going up so much, and so that's kind of the cost to rebuild stuff. I've seen
Right.
the cost of claims and delays in delays in getting materials has also driven the cost up,
Right.
for these claims that we've been seeing as well. So look, I always say that my carrier partners might not like me saying this, right? But I kind of say the insurance carrier, I kind of assume every insurance carrier is out there to kind of screw us, and it's our job to make sure that it's impossible for them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Not to say there are some
There's
okay.
a lot of good carriers out
Yeah,
there.
there's some good carriers out there, right? And we work with the good guys for the most part, right? But even that being said, I still always expect that I don't want to make it easy. I want to make it, black and white that we do have coverage in any situation that we could be in.
And I think that's with insurance. I mean, we're in this business for one reason. I mean, insurance serves one function, that's to pay claims. When something happens, to pay the claim. And so we don't need to make it easy for the insurance company to say no. And that's the big thing is, if there's all these exclusions in there, they go, oh yeah, no coverage because of this, this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
And the easier you make it for them, then yeah, the chance of them denying it is going to be better. So that's why as we're going through these policies, looking for these types of exclusions, it's to make it harder for an insurance company to try and get out of it, and so and make sure that our contractors and our clients are protected. So no, we appreciate your time. I hope you all got a lot of good information out of this, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Thank you.